The thing about seeing ghosts is that it ruins you for normalcy. Not in the dramatic, asylum-bound way horror films often portray. It's subtler. It's the constant, sickening realization that the world you navigate, the world of concrete, physics, and immutable rules, is merely a thin, transparent membrane stretched over an ocean of churning, malicious, and highly kinetic energy. You no longer walk in the world. You float on a fragile surface above the deep. My name is Dorian Vane. For 10 years, I was a respected, if cynical, paranormal investigator. I excelled at cataloging the cold spots, debunking the faulty wiring, and occasionally, documenting an atmospheric anomaly that lingered beyond logical explanation. I prided myself on my detachment. I always kept the lens of my camera, the meter of my electromagnetic detector, and the steel of my skepticism between myself and the phenomenon. I was an observer, never a participant. Then came the incident in the Catskills. A cheap, hurried job that nearly cost me my life and, more importantly, broke the lens of my sanity. The details of that night are irrelevant now, only the result matters. I left the field, sold all my equipment, and relocated to New Orleans, a city that already wears its veil of death and history so openly it felt ironically mundane to an ex-expert. I hoped the city's inherent darkness, its voodoo history, its crumbling cemeteries, its constant humidity, would simply absorb my remaining psychic residue and allow me to fade into quiet irrelevance. Didn't. In fact, it amplified it. It started exactly 6 weeks ago, not with dramatic apparitions, but with the atmosphere itself turning hostile. I'd be sitting in my small, high-ceilinged French Quarter apartment, enjoying the stifling quiet, when the air would suddenly grow viscous and heavy, thick with the scent of ozone and something intensely acrid, like burnt sulfur or old meat. The temperature in a 3-foot radius around me would plummet. A cold spot so dense and isolated it would draw gooseflesh beneath my shirt despite the suffocating Louisiana heat. I justified it at first. Environmental decay, old wiring, bad plumbing, swamp gas seeping up from the ancient foundations. But then the subtle, deliberate manipulations began. The way a heavy silver fork on my counter would pivot precisely 45 degrees when my back was turned, defying all laws of friction and gravity. The soft, wet thump of something heavy falling in the upstairs apartment. An apartment I knew had been vacant and boarded up for years. The sounds were designed not to scare, but to disturb. They were calculated cracks in the mundane reality I desperately tried to inhabit. The true escalation began with the shadows. They weren't just the absence of light. They were concentrations of it, darker than dark, coagulating in the corners of my vision. I saw them in the mirrors, too, not replacing my reflection, but overlapping it. A distorted, elongated figure of pure black geometry, standing just over my shoulder, always gazing past me with an unknown intent. This wasn't just a haunting. This was the slow, deliberate contagion of sight, the infection of my reality with something deeply, structurally wrong. It was the feeling of being watched not by a lost soul, but by a hungry intelligence. The crucial turning point came during a sleepless night, about 2 weeks ago. I was lying in bed, listening to the familiar sound of heavy, deliberate footsteps pacing the narrow balcony outside my door. I knew nothing was there. I knew the iron railing was rusted, and any physical weight would cause a loud, betraying screech. Yet the deep, steady creak continued, moving back and forth, mocking my rationale. I snapped. I didn't get up in fear, but in rage. I threw the door open, ready to scream at the empty hall, prepared to accept madness just to end the noise. I stopped dead. The hallway was empty, shrouded in the humid silence of the city. But then, a sudden blinding flash of white light, like a burst of internal lightning, ripped across the inside of my eyelids. When my vision finally cleared, I felt a sharp, agonizing pressure on my forearm. Looking down, I saw a thin, perfectly straight red line, a fresh, bleeding laceration, where nothing had been seconds before. It looked like a razor cut, deep enough to draw blood, but clean. That single cut changed everything. Ghosts don't cut skin. Spirits can't breach the physical barrier unless they can manipulate reality in ways that break all known rules of death and energy. I was no longer dealing with residual energy or confused, lost souls looking for help. I was dealing with predators. My academic curiosity, which had been dormant for years, surged back, fueled now by a primal, survival-driven dread. I had to know the rules of this new game. If they could cut me, what else could they do? Could they kill me? Could they destroy my physical body? I delved into the forbidden archives of the occult and forgotten history of New Orleans, searching for documented cases where spectral entities inflicted physical, measurable, fatal harm. The voodoo temples, the archives of the old parish churches, the notes of disgraced doctors, they all held pieces of the puzzle. The answers I found were terrifyingly scarce but devastatingly consistent. The vast majority of spirits are harmless, stuck in a loop of memory. But there is a minute yet undeniable percentage that possesses the focused, malevolent will to interact violently with the physical plane. They don't just scare. They injure, they mutilate, they destroy. They are spiritual serial killers, and they possess the ultimate defense: untouchability. My search eventually led me to a single, ancient text hidden within the back rooms of a decaying private library near the Garden District, the Necropolis Ledger. It wasn't bound in typical cloth or leather. It was a rough collection of brittle vellum sheets secured by a heavy iron clasp. It contained a collection of police reports, coroner's notes, and handwritten confessions spanning 3 centuries, all focused on the most inexplicable supernatural murders in the Gulf Coast region. It detailed 7 distinct entities, each unique in their method, but sharing one chilling geographical commonality. They were universally feared, possessing the highest body counts, and their victims' deaths were undeniable, physical, and brutally rendered. The realization was a punch to the gut. I wasn't compiling a dossier on killers. I was recording the history of the world's most dangerous, successful, and elusive murderers, ones who had cheated mortality itself. The ledger opened with the story of the first, a creature of fire and spite, and it gave a single, recurring geographical coordinate. Every single entry, every single atrocity, the scorch curse, the ego dredge, the veil theft, the acts of betrayal, and the 3 roadhounds pointed back to the same cursed location: the abandoned Amaranthine Manor. A place that wasn't just haunted, but was, in its purest sense, a spirit confluence point, a permanent gateway for malevolence. I transcribed the first story that very night, driven by the chilling revelation that my casual haunting had led me directly to the epicenter of supernatural malice. If I was going to survive, I needed to know the identity and the method of every malignant soul trapped within that terrible house. I needed to understand the rules of the contagion before my sight led me to its source and made me their final victim. The Amaranthine Manor was not merely a building. It was a cage for the damned, and the next pages were the floor plan of my own impending nightmare. The first 3 spirits are bound to the core of the manor, each a testament to a horrific death or crime. We begin with Isolde Sanguine, the Witch of the Pyre. The ledger's next entries confirmed my gravest fear. The spirits of Amaranthine Manor were not disorganized chaos. They were malignancies, meticulously bound to the core of the property, each defined by a single brutal act that broke the barrier between the mortal and the eternally predatory. They are the echoes of the most vicious deaths that occurred on the property itself, deaths by fire, by hanging, and by the surgical theft of identity. Isolde Sanguine. Her name, a blend of isolation and blood, suits her fate. Her story predates the formal manor structure, stretching back to the late 1700s when the Amaranthine land was merely a remote, fever-ridden cotton plantation bordering the darkest stretches of the Louisiana bayou. Isolde was not born a witch. She was an outcast, a beautiful but fiercely independent woman who chose the solitude of the swamp over the judgment of the burgeoning township nearby. The isolation suited her until the day she unearthed a relic during a harsh drought. A grimoire, bound in human skin and inscribed with symbols that bled power, buried deep beneath the roots of an ancient cypress tree. She became a practitioner of the darker arts, but initially a benevolent one. Her spells were used to heal the plantation workers' snake bites, to ward off malarial fever, and to guide lost fishermen through the treacherous fog of the bayou. However, fear is a corrosive solvent to gratitude. When a crippling, violent plague swept through the neighboring settlement, killing livestock and children alike, the townsfolk looked to the nearest convenient aberration. They looked to the beautiful woman who spoke to spirits. They came for her on a night when the moon was thick and red, a blood moon. The ledger details the horrific event with chilling clarity. They did not drown her, which would have been clean. They built a pyre of scrap wood and tinder and tied her to the center post, right at the edge of the plantation grounds. As the flames licked her bare feet, the townsfolk expected screams, pleas for mercy or curses. Instead, they were met with an unnerving silence. Isolde did not cry out. She simply closed her eyes, and through the roaring of the flames, she began to whisper. Her incantations were not pleas to the living, but ironclad contracts with the hungry entities she had once merely studied. She bound her agonizing death, her pure, white-hot pain, to the very land. She didn't seek to merely haunt. She sought to replicate her death on those who dared to invade her space. The pyre burned for hours until nothing was left but a pile of ash and a charred skull. Decades later, when the original Amaranthine Manor was constructed, the foundations were unknowingly laid directly over Isolde's execution ground. Her current haunting resides in what is now known as the Coven Chamber, a small, circular servants' room in the oldest wing of the manor. In the center of the room sits a single, high-backed wooden chair, perpetually clean amidst the dust and decay. Her presence is a chilling temperature drop and the distinct, cloying smell of scorched rosemary and sulfur. The ledger confirms that the victims were all trespassers, drawn to the mystery of the forbidden room. They often found the chair inviting, a seemingly perfect spot to rest or take a photograph. The scorch curse is her method. It is agonizing, precise, and inescapable. The moment a victim sits in the chair, a wave of heat, dry and absolute, washes over them. It begins as a comfortable warmth, then quickly escalates to a fever pitch. The spectral entity of Isolde appears not as a burning corpse, but as the beautiful woman she was before the flames, but with one terrifying detail. Her eyes are solid molten gold, glowing from within. She will sit opposite the victim, smiling. She will not speak, but the victim hears a rhythmic hissing sound, like fat rendering, inside their own skull. The true horror begins when the internal temperature of the victim's body rapidly spirals out of control. Police reports on the 4 known victims, found over a 50-year span, are sickeningly consistent. The victims never moved from the chair. Their clothes were untouched, but the bodies themselves were destroyed from the inside. Tissues and organs would literally boil, their blood turning to a thick, black syrup. The final moments were agonizing, with the skin tightening and cracking like baked clay, and the victim's eyes bursting from the pressure. Forensic teams noted that the skin surrounding the ribs and abdomen had a distinct, smoked aroma, while the internal organs appeared to have been cooked at over 500 degrees. Isolde Sanguine inflicts her pain with the focused intensity of a ritual, ensuring the victim feels every stage of the agonizing death she endured. They become a living pyre, incinerated by their own biology, while the air around her remains perfectly cool. If Isolde's malice was rooted in vengeance and the soil of the bayou, the next entity, Baron Von Hess, anchored the horror within the building's Gilded Age excess. Baron Silas took ownership of the manor in the late 1880s, transforming it into a monument to his own wealth and ego. He married Lady Eleanor, a quiet, fragile woman who quickly developed a profound, inexplicable melancholy, eventually retreating into total silence. She became a beautiful living statue, haunting the halls with her sorrowful, silent presence. Baron Silas, a man who defined himself by admiration and social dominance, was driven mad by his wife's absolute emotional absence. He couldn't stand being ignored, even by his own spouse. In a fit of desperate, possessive rage, he entered her room, kissed her one last time on the forehead, and strangled her. The guilt, however, was immediate and soul-crushing. His crime destroyed his carefully curated image of himself as a benevolent, admired gentleman. Unable to face the ruin of his ego, he sought his death in the most spectacular room of the house, the portrait gallery. This massive, high-ceilinged room was dedicated entirely to his own image, featuring 10 life-sized oil paintings of him in various heroic poses. He crafted a flawless noose from a velvet curtain rope, dragged a gilded chair beneath his largest portrait, and committed suicide. The final act was one of twisted confession. Before kicking the chair away, he used his own fingernails to carve the words "It was my silence" deep into the hardwood floorboards beneath his dangling feet. The Haunting of Baron Silas is a study in destructive self-pity and contagious despair. He is found exclusively in the portrait gallery, a space perpetually dusted with a fine, chalky powder that resembles pulverized bone. The moment a victim enters the gallery, they feel a profound sense of utter inadequacy. The room itself, lined with the Baron's egotistical portraits, judges them. The spectral Baron appears not as a decaying corpse, but as he was in life, impeccably dressed in a Victorian suit, but with a horrifying alteration. His head perpetually hangs at a 60-degree angle, and his throat is distended and black from the velvet rope. He doesn't interact physically. His method, the ego dredge, is purely psychic. The Baron targets the victim's self-worth, systematically dredging up every failure, every regret, and every moment of humiliation until they are entirely convinced of their own worthlessness. The attack reaches its climax when the victim is overwhelmed by a single, dominating thought: the world would be better off without me. Driven by this inescapable despair, the victim is psychically forced to reenact the Baron's final moments. They retrieve the nearest cord, strap, or rope, drag a heavy object beneath the nearest high point, and hang themselves. The police reports are haunting. The victims are often found dead by suicide, but their faces bear an expression of absolute, tearless resignation, and their hands are always shredded, bloody, and broken. They have spent their last moments frantically carving a variation of the Baron's confession into the wood, the wall, or even their own chests. The true horror is that the Baron doesn't want to kill them quickly. He wants them to fully embrace his reason for death, that their life, like his, was an unacceptable failure that required immediate erasure. If the Baron's curse targeted the emptiness of the soul, the horror of the third malignancy, Zephyr Alarick, targeted the very face of identity itself. He is a terrifying creature driven by vanity and the obsessive need for normalcy. Zephyr was a successful silk merchant who traveled to the manor in the early 1900s to complete a large, private sale to the then-current owner. The transaction went wrong. In a small skirmish with an angry local gang, Zephyr was caught. They didn't kill him. They administered an old, forgotten punishment. A chemical bath of lye and acid poured over his face. He was left alive, his face a ruined, molten mask of scar tissue, his features pulled tight into a grotesque caricature of a scream. Driven by shame and a primal need for his former handsome appearance, he returned to the manor, hiding in the shadows. He became convinced that the only way to live again was to simply take the face of another. He selected the current owner, a vain, middle-aged man who resembled his former self. Using a heavy stone and a shard of sharpened glass, Zephyr murdered him. The ledger is explicit about the aftermath. Zephyr performed a crude, desperate operation on the corpse, laboriously peeling the skin of the face away from the skull, preserving the features, the hair, and the eyes. He then stretched this veil of human flesh over his own ruined face. It was in this moment of success, admiring his new mask in a dark mirror in the attic, that he was found by the owner's returning son and killed. Zephyr Alarick, the veil thief, haunts the narrow, suffocating attic of the manor, the place of his short-lived triumph and death. His presence is characterized by the oppressive smell of old leather and preserved organs, and a pervasive, itching sensation that covers the victim's entire face. He appears as a tall, imposing figure in a dated suit, his face unervingly smooth and perfect. But upon closer inspection, the face is slightly too large for his head, stretched and stitched crudely around the edges, like a child's art project using papier-mâché. His method, the veil theft, is a slow psychological torture leading to a physical horror. Zephyr does not engage in a quick attack. He stalks his victim, focusing his psychic power on their face. The victim experiences excruciating, phantom pain, a feeling of needles being sewn into the cheekbones, a tightness around the eyes, and a deep, burning ache along the jawline. The victim believes they are having a neurological episode. When he finally attacks, it is sudden and relentless. He forces the victim to the ground and begins to use a sharp object, always a tool or shard of glass found within the attic, to methodically slice through the facial tissue. The horror is not the pain, but the absolute precision. Police reports of the 14 known victims found in and around the attic detail the same sickening pathology. The victims died from massive blood loss, not from a blow to the head or heart. Their faces were surgically, meticulously excised from the skull, stripped clean of all skin, muscle, and cartilage, leaving only the bleached white bone and the screaming cavity of the mouth. Zephyr Alarick craves his former vanity so deeply that he continues the ritual of the veil theft upon anyone foolish enough to stumble into his sanctuary, stealing their appearance to wear as his own macabre trophy. These first 3 entries reveal a disturbing pattern. The spirits of Amaranthine are not randomized. They are bound to specific locations and methods of their suffering or their final crime. Isolde burns you where she burned. Silas hangs you where he hung. Zephyr strips you of your face where he found his new one. But the next spirit, Seraphina Llewellyn, is different. Her malice was calculated. Her murders performed out of cold greed, not desperation. Her presence defines the entire structure of the manor as a hunting ground. Her story will prove that the physical building itself is tainted by betrayal and blood. Her estimated death toll is 22 confirmed victims. Her name is Seraphina Llewellyn, the Axe Bride. If the early spirits were born from the land's pain and the manor's ego, Isolde seeking vengeance, Silas seeking affirmation, and Zephyr seeking identity, the next spirit, Seraphina Llewellyn, was different. She was a malignancy of pure, calculated greed, a hunter who chose Amaranthine not as a sanctuary, but as a hunting ground. Her story proves that the entire structure of the manor is tainted by intentional, premeditated acts of betrayal. Seraphina was once a well-known, albeit middling, actress on the New York stage in the 1920s. She possessed a striking, classical beauty and an unparalleled ego. She believed that roles should be offered to her, not auditioned for. As time and age stole the novelty of her youthful arrogance, work began to dry up. The charm that once excused her rudeness evaporated, and the bills piled up, forcing the spoiled darling to face the harsh reality of her financial ruin. She needed not a role, but a salvation, and she knew her beauty was the only currency she had left. The final night of her final, failed production, Seraphina caught sight of a wealthy-looking man in the audience. He was not a local, but an outsider, instantly distinguishable by the cut of his suit and the look of fresh wonder on his face. A face that belonged not in the cynical atmosphere of a failing Broadway show, but in the innocent, wide-eyed world of inherited wealth. Seraphina made her move outside the theater, employing every skill of manipulation and seduction she possessed. The man, utterly captivated, could do nothing but lavish praise upon her beauty and talent. His name was Arthur Ellington, a cotton magnate from the South, currently staying in the city for business. They spent the next few days in a whirlwind romance, sightseeing, dining at the finest restaurants, and sharing clandestine moments in Central Park. Arthur was completely besotted. Before he had to leave, Seraphina delivered the performance of her life, confessing a sudden, desperate love. He agreed to take her with him. Seraphina didn't look back. She abandoned her life, her debts, and her few remaining connections in New York and moved south with Arthur. They married quickly, the talk of children already in the air. Arthur, overjoyed with his beautiful, passionate bride, went to the most exclusive jeweler in New Orleans and bought her the first of her legendary treasures, a magnificent, expensive strand of pearls. Seraphina loved the necklace, but she loved the power of her new life far more. 3 months after the wedding, Arthur was dead. Seraphina reported the murder to the local sheriff with a convincing display of shock and grief, claiming it happened just after their honeymoon night. When the police arrived at the isolated estate, which would later become the core structure of the Amaranthine Manor, they found Arthur's body alone, in a widening pool of blood. His head had been severed, laid neatly a few feet from the crimson-soaked stump. The police, immediately suspecting local bandits or a land dispute, never once looked at the beautiful, weeping widow. They concluded the weapon was a small, sharp, blunt instrument that required multiple, repetitive swings to complete the decapitation. Arthur, along with his separated head, was buried in the family graveyard on the property. Seraphina showed little concern for his memory and immediately set about enjoying the immense wealth he had left her. The investigation quietly faded, and soon after, Seraphina owned everything that belonged to her late husband. Everything, including a small, freshly cleaned hatchet she had removed from his tool shed not long before the murder. She hid the evidence deep within the darkest corners of the mansion's attic, the space directly above the grand staircase, a future sanctuary for her dark secrets. Life quickly grew dull. Collecting her late husband's belongings and managing his money was satisfying for a time, but Seraphina craved the thrill of the hunt, the fresh rush of a new conquest, and most importantly, an even more extravagant treasure. She needed a new, wealthy husband. She began the cycle again, luring in a second victim. The second man, a shipping magnate named Julian, arrived soon after, captivated by Seraphina's allure and the grand, if slightly decaying, southern estate. He sold his property for a large profit and moved into the manor. Julian adored Seraphina, and for their wedding gift, he purchased her an even more spectacular, expensive pearl necklace than the first. He was married and dead within months. The ritual was tragically consistent. Seraphina would invite her new husband to the privacy of the attic, claiming to show him some family heirlooms. There, she would retrieve the old, sharp, blunt instrument. The ledger details the sickening, focused violence. She struck Julian in the neck, and even as he fell, she continued to strike, hacking away, her greed overpowering any human empathy. The blood sprayed across the wooden walls and ceiling as she worked relentlessly to complete the decapitation. Once the spine was disconnected, Seraphina was always careful to finish the job, separating the head entirely. She then collected his wealth, his pearls, and buried him next to Arthur in the small, private graveyard on the Amaranthine grounds. Within the next 3 years, 2 more graves appeared next to the first 2. She had perfected her ritual, her control, and her ability to feign the role of the grieving widow. She acquired her 5th and most expensive pearl necklace, possessing a fortune that would make a queen jealous. The constant in this murderous tapestry was her wedding dress. The same pristine, silk garment, a family heirloom passed down from her mother, which she wore for all 5 of her weddings. The dress remained pure white, always immaculate after the bloody work was done. Her 5th husband, a railroad tycoon named Mr. Silas, unfortunately, brought complications. He had a grown son from a previous marriage, a young man named Elias who was wary of his father's hasty marriage to the dazzling Seraphina. Elias suspected her motives from the start, convinced she was merely a black widow after his father's fortune. The day after the wedding, Elias came to the manor looking for his father. He heard a peculiar, rhythmic, sickening sound emanating from the rarely used attic. Elias climbed the narrow, claustrophobic stairs. The scene that greeted him was etched into the police reports and forever stained the manor's history. Seraphina, still wearing her pure white wedding dress, stood over a bloody, mutilated mess that was once his father, relentlessly hacking away with the hatchet. The sight broke Elias. He went into a furious, panicked frenzy, tackling the woman and wrenching the bloody hatchet from her grasp. He fought her, but it was too late to save his father. Consumed by grief and righteous fury, he plunged the hatchet into her chest, screaming that a demon as heartless as her deserved no life. Elias did not stop with a single blow. He hacked away at her, tearing through her rib cage and chest muscle. Seraphina's pure white wedding dress instantly transformed, soaking up the crimson blood as the fabric ripped. He didn't stop until he reached the final beating organ. Reaching deep inside, Elias gained a slippery hold on her heart, still faintly, slowly beating, and yanked it violently out of her body. Elias stood over the devastation, pulling the heavy wedding ring his father had given her off her bloody finger, and threw it out the attic window. He wanted nothing of this woman to remain connected to his father's memory. He then shoved Seraphina's mutilated body into a nearby, large wooden trunk, locking it. The ledger confirms the final tragedy. Mr. Silas rests in the family graveyard next to the others. Seraphina's body was never recovered by the authorities, still resting in that locked trunk in the attic, hidden from the world. But Elias, the vengeful son, had made one final, crucial mistake. He had hidden Seraphina's heart somewhere else in the attic, away from the body. Elias himself met a mysterious, undocumented death in that same room soon after, perhaps a final act of the manor's curse. The ghost of Seraphina Llewellyn, the axe bride, is now bound eternally to the attic, her rage and greed manifesting in a desperate, endless search for her severed heart, which she believes is the only way she can feel love again, or perhaps, feel anything again beyond hatred and avarice. She can only be found in the attic of her once home. Her spirit, when first encountered, will appear as the beautiful, dazzling actress she once was, wearing her immaculate white dress, the one that will forever be stained with her own blood. She will smile the most welcoming, innocent smile imaginable, showing off the treasures she collected in life. The 5 strands of pearls, the money, the house. This is the moment of ultimate danger. If you stay, you will begin to hear it. The deep, rhythmic, terrifying thumping of her heart, still beating somewhere in the room, just out of her grasp. Seraphina will use her beauty to lure in her victims, particularly men, only to vanish completely. Then, she reappears in the nearest mirror, contorted and grotesque, her blood-soaked dress dripping on the floor. Her false beauty fades, revealing the monstrous, tormented soul. You will feel her cold, stale breath on the back of your neck. Then comes the final, inevitable sensation. A sharp, heavy, blunt strike to the back of your neck. No matter how hard you fight or where you try to escape, Seraphina's hatchet, the instrument of all her crimes, will find you. You will feel your head being torn from your body by the relentless, focused force of the spirit. It is the final, agonizing horror. A predator who takes life not for survival, but for the sheer, malicious pleasure of taking what she can never enjoy again. Her collective victims, including her husband's, are estimated at 22. Her death cemented the attic as a place of terminal violence, but her spirit is bound to the property itself, connecting the interior horror with the exterior, the cemetery. And that leads us to the final and deadliest set of spirits, the three brothers who sought refuge on the property, and whose crimes still haunt the road leading to Amaranthine Manor. They are known only as the Roadhounds, the executioner, the carver, and the dissector. Their combined toll is the highest, and their presence defines the ultimate terror of this cursed land. The entities bound to the interior of Amaranthine Manor are terrible in their localized suffering, the fire, the despair, the betrayal. But their horror is confined by walls and architecture. The final, and in many ways the most pervasive, threat lives outside the manor, on the desolate, winding ribbon of asphalt that leads travelers to the property. The triumvirate of the road. Dorian Vane paused here in his transcription of the ledger, realizing the scope of the evil. These 7 spirits are the perfect ecosystem of murder. The 4 within the walls feed on greed, ego, vengeance, and vanity, forcing the victims to actively seek out their doom. The 3 on the road are predators of opportunity, the spiritual gatekeepers who ensure that no one who approaches the manor ever leaves, and that their death is merely the first layer of the manor's curse. The story of the Blighted Brothers begins in the desperate years of the 1930s, the Great Depression era, far from the polished halls of New Orleans wealth. Balthazar, Ignatius, and Percival were 3 brothers, born into abject poverty in the dusty, impoverished expanses of rural Florida. Their parents succumbed to illness and debt, leaving the 3 young men with nothing but an old, sputtering Ford and a shared, ravenous hunger. They were not born monsters, but necessity honed them into something crueler than human. They became the Roadhounds, highwaymen of the Gulf Coast. Their MO was simple and brutal. They targeted travelers, merchants, and small, isolated families in the desperate hope of finding food, cash, or fuel. Their violence escalated quickly. Initial muggings turned into robberies, which turned into targeted murders to ensure silence. Balthazar, the eldest, became the executioner, cold and calculating, using an old, small-caliber pistol with surgical indifference. Ignatius, the middle brother, known for his unsettling quietness, became the carver, specializing in disabling victims with his razor-sharp hunting knife. Percival, the youngest, possessed a strange, unsettling knowledge of human anatomy, gleaned from his work as a farmer butchering livestock. He became the dissector, the most feared of the trio, who took sadistic pleasure in the process of death. For years, they terrorized the remote roads between Florida and Louisiana. But the net of law and local outrage began to tighten. With the reward for their capture swelling, the brothers fled west, seeking an isolated, forgotten haven. They found it in the derelict land surrounding Amaranthine Manor. They knew the place was abandoned, rumored to be haunted, and remote enough to offer absolute safety. Their sanctuary was not the manor itself, but the abandoned family crypt in the overgrown cemetery, a crumbling stone mausoleum carved into a small hill overlooking the muddy bayou. They broke into the crypt, dragged out the centuries-old caskets, and set up a makeshift camp among the bleached bones and decaying velvet. For 3 weeks, they hid, living off canned food and the occasional rabbit caught in the swamp, convinced they had escaped justice. Their end was swift and horrific. The ledger suggests that the land, already saturated with the malice of Isolde, Silas, Seraphina, and the thousands of hidden souls, sensed their violence. It didn't need to kill them, it merely needed to claim them. They were found by an accidental patrol of state militia. The 3 brothers, starved and pale, dead in the crypt, their faces contorted in expressions of absolute terror, as if they had witnessed the convergence of all the evils they had created and those the manor already contained. The official report noted no wounds, no signs of struggle, and no cause of death beyond shock. Their bodies were left there, buried hastily in the crypt they had desecrated, sealing their fate to the Amaranthine property forever. As spirits, their existence is a twisted mimicry of their former lives. They are eternally bound to the path of their crimes, the long, isolated access road leading from the main highway into the manor. They manifest as spectral hitchhikers, preying on the inherent kindness or curiosity of passing drivers. Dorian Vane's research found dozens of documented disappearances and bizarre single-car fatalities along that stretch of road, all victims of the triumvirate's ambush. The ledger provides a chilling, unbreakable warning for travelers. Never stop. Never acknowledge the figures. If they vanish from the rearview mirror, they are already inside the vehicle. Balthazar the Executioner. The eldest brother, Balthazar, targets vehicles carrying families or groups. The innocent, the happy, the successful, whose lives he envies. He manifests first as a figure standing silently on the side of the road, dressed in ragged, outdated clothes, often seen adjusting a flat, dark cap. If a car stops, he will appear inside the back seat. His presence is accompanied by a sudden, metallic, overwhelming smell of gunpowder and cheap whiskey. His method is the simplest and the most decisive: the execution. Once the victim realizes he is there, a wave of paralyzing fear hits them. He does not use his spectral hands. Instead, the victim feels the impossible sensation of a cold, small-caliber pistol pressed against the side of their skull. A second later, the sound of a gunshot echoes inside the victim's own head, followed by an immediate, catastrophic blow out of the brain and skull. The result is always a gory, high-speed crash. A tragic single-car accident caused by the driver's instantaneous, violent death. Balthazar, having extinguished the happiness he coveted, vanishes, waiting for the next beacon of life to pass by. Ignatius the Carver. Ignatius, the silent, terrifying middle brother, targets vehicles carrying couples, lovers, friends, or companions. He preys on intimacy and attachment, driven by the lonely emptiness of his own final days. He appears as a man with eyes that are perpetually wide and bloodshot, his hands twitching restlessly as if ready to wield a blade. If a car slows down, he manifests in the back seat, separating the two occupants with a chilling, tangible distance. His presence fills the car with the suffocating scent of stale blood and iron. His method is elaborate, cruel, and designed to maximize suffering. The mute carving. Ignatius focuses first on the driver. The victim experiences a sensation of impossible sharpness, a razor being drawn across their throat. There is no blood, but the spiritual blade severs the vocal cords, ensuring the driver can only choke on silent terror. He then moves to the passenger. The carver attacks with a frantic, animalistic rage, forcing the passenger to endure two separate agonies. First, their eyes are clawed out with spectral knives, ensuring they cannot see the final moments of their partner. Second, their tongue is violently ripped out from its root. The victim dies of shock and spiritual trauma, drowning in their own mute, blind agony, ensuring that no witness can ever describe the supernatural horror they endured. The police always find two bodies, one with a pristine neck, yet unable to cry out, the other with empty eye sockets and a torn mouth, silent witnesses to their own demise. Percival, the dissector. The youngest, Percival, is the most refined and arguably the most terrifying. He targets solitary travelers, people alone, perhaps lost, or simply seeking quiet reflection. He is driven by a profound, clinical curiosity about the internal mechanisms of the body. He appears as a gaunt figure, his hands strangely long and slender, seemingly too delicate for the violence they inflict. His presence is marked by a deep, sickly sweet smell of formaldehyde and decay, a disturbing olfactory blend suggesting an unholy autopsy. Percival's method, the internal autopsy, is the most insidious. He does not kill instantly. If the victim slows, he manifests in the passenger seat. He spends several minutes studying them, his spectral fingers tracing invisible lines on their face and chest. Then, the psychological torture begins. The victim is seized by an overwhelming, acute illness. They feel unimaginable, agonizing pain as their internal organs begin to rapidly decay, bloat, and twist. The sensation is that of their stomach, liver, and intestines spontaneously rotting and expanding, tearing at the confines of their own skin and muscle. The victim writhes, stopping the car, driven mad by the internal pressure. The final, terrifying act is when the victim's skin, unable to contain the biological decomposition and psychic pressure, begins to rupture and tear open at the abdomen and chest. The victim, still alive and conscious, dies watching their own body literally shred itself apart from the inside. Percival watches, fascinated, his curiosity finally satisfied as he observes the destruction of the human engine he could not understand in life. The triumvirate ensures that the road to Amaranthine is a gauntlet of terror, a graveyard paved with crushed glass and broken bodies. They are the 7 deadly sins made flesh, or rather made spectral, permanently bound to the cursed confluence of the land. Only one file remains: the final confrontation with the manor's dark heart. The Amaranthine confluence. The ledger ends abruptly here, its final pages stained, not with blood, but with the faded, brittle ink of utter terror. I, Dorian Vane, compiled this terrifying document from those fragments, from the scattered police reports, the forbidden folklore, and the desperate warnings of those few souls, like poor Elias, Seraphina's stepson, who briefly escaped the manor's grasp. I have meticulously detailed the 7 most powerful entities: Isolde, who burns from within; Baron Silas, who compels the final, quiet act of despair; Zephyr, who hunts for new skin in the dark; Seraphina, the beautiful predator of the attic; and the road hounds, Balthazar, Ignatius, and Percival, who dissect and destroy the traveler before they even reach the gate. Their collective estimated toll climbs well over 100, but the truth is certainly far, far higher. They are the apex predators of the ethereal world. But here is the discovery that chilled me to the bone, the ultimate truth that ties every loose thread of this terrifying tapestry together. They are all connected. The manor is not merely a haunted location. It is an organic spiritual amplifier, a nexus point of concentrated, focused evil. Every victim, every tragedy, and every malevolent act committed by these 7 entities is geographically bound to one single, cursed expanse of land in the deep, remote bayou, the Amaranthine Manor. Arthur Ellington, Seraphina's first husband, was buried in the Amaranthine Cemetery. The crypt the roadhounds perished in is located on the Amaranthine grounds. Isolde's coven chamber is a hidden room deep within the manor's foundations. Baron Silas hanged himself in the manor's portrait gallery. Zephyr and Seraphina conducted their sickening rituals in the manor's vast, dusty attic. This property is not just a structure, it is a spiritual confluence, a point where the dark energy of the land, the cultural despair of New Orleans' occult history, and the accumulated violence of centuries meet and multiply. The accounts I studied suggest that the 7 spirits are merely the high-ranking officers of a much larger, darker army. The ledger hints that the property, including the cemetery, the house, the slave quarters, and the surrounding swamp, is home to nearly 1,000 documented, active spectral entities. They are the whispers in the walls, the cold spots in the hallways, the shuffling feet in the dark. The 7 entities I have detailed are simply the ones powerful enough to break the barrier, to exert physical force, and to kill with a purpose. This makes the property a living, malevolent organism. The very soil is poisoned. The air is thick with despair. The wood of the floorboards creaks not from age, but from the weight of the souls trapped beneath. I understand the human impulse toward curiosity. I know the magnetic pull of the unknown. But I, Dorian Vane, who has dedicated my life to documenting the spectral world, offer this one, absolute, unconditional warning. You must never, under any circumstance, seek out the Amaranthine Manor. Do not travel the road. Do not search for the location on antique maps. Do not entertain the notion of testing these rumors. Whether you believe in the spectral world or not is irrelevant. These entities do not care about your personal beliefs. They are the hungry, the calculating, and the utterly ruthless. To approach the manor is to place yourself at the nexus point of guaranteed annihilation. I will not disclose the exact location. I have destroyed the final, conclusive map references in the ledger. The property has been hidden from the public for generations precisely because of the scale of the tragedies that occurred there. It needs to remain forgotten, untouched, and utterly avoided. I finished this transcript an hour ago. The sun has not yet risen. I am sitting in my rented room here in the French Quarter, miles away from the bayou, miles from that cursed land. But I feel the cold. The window pane is rattling, though there is no wind. The air in this room, which was pleasantly warm moments ago, is now dropping rapidly. I can smell it now, too, that faint, unsettling aroma of burnt oil and sulfur. It is not strong, but it is unmistakable. It is the signature of Isolde Sanguine, the witch of the bayou. I have documented the most dangerous spirits in the world. But by doing so, I have committed an act of spiritual defiance. I have drawn their attention. I walked to the dresser mirror a moment ago. My reflection was normal, but I could swear I saw a second image behind me. A tall, skeletal figure, its eyes wide and bloodshot, its hands long and thin, like an expert surgeon's. It was the reflection of Percival, the dissector. He wasn't in the room, but he was in the reflection. He was watching. The fear is not the cold, not the scent of sulfur, and not the reflection. The fear is the sudden, chilling thought that the manor does not need you to come to it. Its influence travels. I just heard a faint, slow thumping sound, rhythmic and deep, coming from the walls themselves. It is the sound of a heart beating just out of reach. I am throwing this entire manuscript into the world, hoping that the warning will survive. If you are reading this, know the truth. There are things in this world that we do not understand, and the cost of venturing into the unknown can be your life. I hear the creak of the floorboards above me. A place I know is empty. The subtle scent of cheap whiskey and gunpowder is now becoming dominant. I pray for your safety. I hope you never fall victim to the spirits of the Amaranthine Manor. I hope you can run faster than they can travel.